Have you ever met someone who wasn't what they seemed? Someone who wore two faces, the powerful boss you couldn't stand by day, and the stranger who stole your heart by night? This is Sophie Bennett's story. Sophie was no stranger to hard work. Every morning, she straightened her blazer, walked into the towering glass building of Cole and Associates, and told herself she could handle anything. But nothing could prepare her for Ethan Cole, the man the city called the Ice King of Wall Street. He wasn't just her boss. He was the man whose presence filled a room, whose every glance sent a chill down her spine, and whose smirk could unravel her faster than she wanted to admit. Handsome, brilliant, untouchable, Ethan Cole was everything Sophie promised herself she would never fall for. And yet, something about him intrigued her. He was demanding, curt, impossible to please, but there were moments, fleeting ones, when she caught him watching her with something softer in his eyes, something that didn't match his ruthless reputation. Moments when she almost believed there was more beneath the ice. But what Sophie didn't know was that Ethan had a secret. Because when the office lights dimmed and the city went quiet, Ethan Cole stopped being the Ice King. At night, he became someone else entirely. A man in worn work clothes, pushing a mop, blending into the background as if he didn't own half the skyline. Why? Test her. To see if the woman who worked for him, who challenged him, who made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years, was genuine. Did she show kindness to everyone, or was it just a mask for her ambitious boss? But Ethan wasn't prepared for what happened next. As the cleaner, he found himself laughing with her, listening to her dreams, sharing pieces of himself he'd long hidden. With every stolen conversation, every spark of banter, every brush of closeness, Sophie began falling for the man she thought was ordinary, never suspecting he was the very boss she rolled her eyes at by day. 2 men, 1 heart, 1 dangerous game. What happens when the boss who played pretend falls too hard for the woman he was never supposed to love? And what happens when Sophie discovers that the man who stole her heart was lying all along? Stay with me, because this is not just a story about deception. It's about love that blooms where it shouldn't, about betrayal that cuts deeper than words, and about whether forgiveness is strong enough to turn a cruel mistake into forever. Let me ask you this before we dive in. Would you forgive someone who lied to win your heart? Or is deception the one thing love can never survive? Tell me what you think in the comments. I'd love to know. Because Sophie's answer will surprise you. The first morning Sophie Bennett walked into Cole and Associates, she felt like she had stepped into another universe. The office tower gleamed against the skyline, its lobby alive with a click of polished heels, the scent of expensive cologne, and the quiet hum of ambition. Everyone seemed to move with urgency, as if their worth depended on how fast they could impress the man who sat at the very top, Ethan Cole. She'd heard about him, of course. Everyone in the city had. The Ice King of Wall Street. The man who turned small fortunes into empires. Who smiled in photographs but rarely in real life. A genius, a visionary. And, if the rumors were true, impossible to work for. Still, Sophie needed this job. Not because she wanted to be someone's secretary forever, but because this paycheck was the bridge to her dream, owning her own event planning business. She reminded herself that every long hour, every curt demand, was a stepping stone to something bigger. But then she met him. Ethan Cole didn't just walk into a room. He commanded it. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a perfectly tailored suit and a gaze so sharp it could slice through steel. He didn't shake hands. He didn't waste words. He simply looked at her, one brow arched, as if assessing whether she was worth his time. "You're late," he said, even though she wasn't. "I'm actually 5 minutes early," Sophie replied, her voice steady despite the nerves sparking in her stomach. The corner of his mouth lifted, almost imperceptibly. "We'll see how long that lasts." That was their beginning, an immediate clash of wills. He issued orders like declarations. She obeyed, but not without a touch of sarcasm that seemed to both infuriate and amuse him. He tested her efficiency, her composure, her patience. She, in turn, learned to read his moods, his silence, the faintest shift of his expression. And though she told herself she couldn't stand him, Sophie couldn't ignore the way her pulse betrayed her whenever his hand brushed hers as he passed a file. Or the way her heart stuttered when his voice softened unexpectedly, low and rough, as he dictated late at night when the office was nearly empty. Ethan noticed it too, the spark. He didn't want to, but he did. Sophie wasn't like the others. She didn't flatter him, didn't cower, didn't treat him as though his name alone should make her bow. She looked him in the eye. She challenged him. And God help him, he liked it. But Ethan Cole didn't allow himself to like anyone. Not anymore. He remembered too clearly the last woman who had claimed to love him. How she had slipped from his life the moment things got difficult, leaving him with nothing but distrust and a lesson carved deep into a soul like him. Vulnerability was weakness. Affection was leverage. Love was nothing but a dangerous illusion. Still, he couldn't stop watching Sophie. Couldn't stop wondering if the warmth in her eyes was real, or just another mask. That's when the idea struck him. It started as curiosity, then sharpened into temptation. What if he saw Sophie outside of his world of power? Not as the woman who worked under him, but as herself, unguarded, uncalculated. Would she still be kind? Would she still laugh so easily? Or would she reveal the same ambition-driven facade he had grown used to from everyone around him? The thought grew until he couldn't resist. One late evening, when the office floor was deserted, Ethan traded his Armani suit for plain work clothes. A baseball cap pulled low, sleeves rolled up, a mop and bucket in hand. The janitor's shift. No one gave him a second glance. For once, Ethan Cole wasn't the Ice King. He was invisible. That's when Sophie found him. She was still at her desk, papers spread across the surface, her hair falling from its bun as she scribbled notes. He almost walked past without speaking, but then she looked up, those wide brown eyes catching him mid-step. "Long night?" she asked, smiling as though they were equals. Ethan swallowed a laugh. If only she knew. "Something like that," he replied, his voice rougher, less polished than usual. She tilted her head. "You're new. Haven't seen you around before." "Just started," he lied smoothly. "Name's Ethan." Her lips curved into a grin. "Well, Ethan, welcome to the madhouse. I'm Sophie." He couldn't help it. The sound of his own name on her lips, soft and unknowing, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. That night they talked. About nothing and everything. She told him about her dream of starting her own business, about how she was saving every dollar, about how she wanted to build something of her own. He listened, really listened like he never did in the boardroom. And when she laughed, tossing her head back with abandon, it was like watching sunlight break through storm clouds. He found himself lingering, making excuses to pass by her desk, to tease her, to hear her laugh again. And Sophie, though she couldn't quite explain it, felt drawn to the cleaner. He was easy to talk to, warm, unpretentious. Everything her boss wasn't. The irony nearly made Ethan choke. But the game couldn't last without cracks appearing. By day, Sophie bristled under Ethan Cole's sharp demands, rolling her eyes when he ordered her to cancel her lunch break for a sudden meeting. By night, she looked forward to her quiet conversations with Ethan the cleaner, confiding in him things she'd never dare say to her intimidating boss. She began to notice similarities. The way both men arched a brow when amused. The way their smiles, rare, fleeting, looked almost the same. She brushed it off. After all, why would a billionaire CEO be mopping floors? Still, the thought lingered, planting seeds of suspicion she wasn't ready to face. And Ethan? He was already in deeper than he intended. What had begun as a test had turned into temptation. He found himself eager for her approval, her laughter, her honesty. He began slipping, saying things as the cleaner that echoed in the boardroom the next morning, forgetting which version of himself she knew. He knew it was dangerous. He knew he was playing with fire. But for the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt alive. And Sophie. She was falling. Not for her boss. Not for the Ice King. But for the man who came to her in the quiet hours. Who listened without judgment, who made her feel seen. The man she didn't know was a lie. Sophie never thought she'd find herself living in two parallel worlds. By day, she endured the sharp edges of Ethan Cole, the man who demanded perfection, who tested her limits with impossible deadlines and cold dismissals. By night, she looked forward to the quiet, stolen moments with Ethan the cleaner, a man who was warm, attentive, and surprisingly easy to talk to. What she didn't know was that the same man filled both roles. For Ethan, it was becoming harder to keep the two halves of himself separate. When he wore the tailored suits, he was the Ice King, controlled, unreadable. But at night, in worn jeans with calloused hands, he let pieces of himself slip through. He laughed. He teased. He confessed things he'd never admit in the boardroom. And with every conversation, every laugh they shared, the walls he'd built around his heart began to crack. One evening, Sophie stayed late again, her hair loose around her shoulders, glasses perched on her nose as she pored over spreadsheets. Ethan leaned on his mop, watching her for a moment before daring to break the silence. "You ever take a night off?" he asked, voice softer than usual. She looked up, a smile tugging at her lips. "Says the guy working a night shift." He chuckled, the sound rough but genuine. "Touché." Something flickered in her eyes. Something curious, something unspoken. For a heartbeat too long, their gazes held. Then she cleared her throat, returning to her work. But Ethan couldn't let it go. "If you could be anywhere else right now, Sophie, where would you be?" She leaned back in her chair, thinking. "Somewhere warm. With music and lights. A place where I could forget about deadlines and bosses and everything." He smiled faintly. "Sounds like a date." Her cheeks flushed, but she laughed. "With who?" "You." The words slipped out before he could stop them. "Why not?" The pause that followed was heavy with possibility. Sophie's breath hitched. She had no idea why her heart was racing at the thought of going out with the janitor. But it was. He made her feel lighter, braver, like maybe she deserved a little happiness. "Maybe someday," she said softly, surprising herself. That someday echoed in Ethan's head long after she went home. The next day, the tension between them felt sharper than ever. Sophie couldn't explain it. Every time Ethan Cole gave her an order, she thought of the gentler Ethan who asked her questions at night. Every time she rolled her eyes at her boss, she felt guilty, as though she were betraying the man she secretly looked forward to seeing after hours. One night, her exhaustion got the better of her. She fell asleep at her desk, her cheek pressed against the papers. Ethan, still disguised, found her like that. For a long moment he just stood there, watching her sleep. Vulnerable, peaceful. Against his better judgment, he reached down and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered longer than they should have. She stirred, her lashes fluttering open. For a moment, she looked up at him as though she were still dreaming. "Sorry," he whispered, pulling back quickly. "Didn't mean to wake you." But Sophie didn't look upset. She looked soft, almost hopeful. "It's okay," she murmured. And then the silence between them shifted. It was no longer just comfortable, it was charged. The kind of silence that hummed with the possibility of a kiss. Ethan forced himself to step back, gripping the handle of his mop like it was an anchor. He couldn't do this. Not like this. She didn't know the truth. But Sophie's heart was already racing. She didn't know why she wanted to close the distance, why she wanted to trust this man she barely knew. All she knew was that with him she felt seen. The next few nights blurred into something dangerously close to intimacy. They shared takeout on her desk, laughing over greasy noodles. He teased her about the way she hummed when she was deep in thought. She told him about her favorite books, the songs she danced to when no one was watching. And one night, when she shivered from the overactive office air conditioning, he shrugged off his jacket. His disguised jacket, worn and faded, and draped it over her shoulders. Her heart melted. It was the simplest gesture, but no man had ever made her feel so cared for with something so small. But the more Ethan gave her pieces of himself, the more dangerous it became. Because Sophie was starting to notice. She noticed the way the cleaner held himself, not like a man beaten down by circumstance, but with quiet authority. She noticed how his hands were calloused, but his words carried an education, a sophistication that didn't fit his supposed role. And she noticed the smile. God, the smile. It was rare, fleeting, but when it appeared, whether from her boss or the cleaner, it looked exactly the same. One evening, she tested her suspicion. "So, Ethan," she said carefully, tilting her head, "what did you do before this job?" He froze for just a fraction of a second before answering. "A little of everything." "Like?" she pressed. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Trust me, you wouldn't believe me if I told you." She laughed, but unease curled in her stomach. Later, as she typed up reports for the real Ethan Cole, she stole glances at him. The way his brow furrowed, the way he tapped his pen against the desk, the way he almost, but not quite, smiled when he caught her muttering under her breath. Two men. One so cold, one so warm. But both impossibly familiar. And then came the night that changed everything. Sophie had been invited to a charity gala by a friend, an event where the city's elite gathered. She almost didn't go. She couldn't afford the dress, the tickets, the pressure. But her friend insisted, lending her a gown that shimmered like liquid gold. She walked into the ballroom, nerves rattling, and then froze. Ethan Cole was there. Not in disguise. Not as the janitor. But in his element. Tuxedo perfectly cut, glass of champagne in hand, eyes scanning the room with the sharpness of a predator. She couldn't breathe. Because in that instant she knew. The cleaner's smile. The boss's eyes. The slip of his voice that carried the same timbre no matter the clothes he wore. Her world tilted. Ethan saw her at the same time. His breath caught in his chest. Sophie, radiant in gold, looking like every fantasy he'd ever denied himself. But then he saw the recognition in her eyes. The betrayal. She turned on her heel, heading for the exit. He followed. "Sophie, wait." His voice was desperate, breaking through the mask of composure he always wore. She spun around outside the ballroom, fury in her gaze. "It was you. All this time. You played me." He flinched at the word. "No, I didn't mean for it to. You lied to me." Her voice cracked raw. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I told you things I've never told anyone. I trusted you." Ethan reached for her arm, but she pulled away. "Sophie, please. It wasn't supposed to go this far. First, yes, it was a test. I needed to know if you were real. If you were different from the rest. But then I couldn't stop. You made me feel alive again." Her chest heaved. "Alive. You used me for entertainment. For some twisted game to cure your boredom." "No," he said fiercely, his eyes blazing. "I never meant to fall for you. But I did. Sophie, I—" "Don't," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "Don't you dare say you love me." The silence that followed was heavy, painful. For the first time, Ethan Cole, the man who controlled everything, felt powerless. Sophie turned and walked away, the shimmer of her gown fading into the night. And Ethan, for the first time in years, felt the sting of true loss. The days after the gala stretched on like a silent punishment. Sophie went to work, her posture straight, her expressions guarded, her eyes avoiding Ethan's at every possible turn. She answered his questions with clipped words, kept her tone professional, and acted as though the man she had laughed with over noodles at midnight had never existed. It killed Ethan. He wanted to tear off the mask, beg her forgiveness, explain how it had started as curiosity but turned into something he couldn't control. But every time he tried, Sophie's eyes hardened, a silent reminder of the night she discovered the truth. Her trust was broken, and he knew how hard it would be to rebuild. One evening, Sophie lingered after work, finishing reports long after everyone else had gone home. Ethan stood in the doorway of his office, watching her. He couldn't take it anymore. "Sophie," he said softly. She didn't look up. "Mr. Cole." That formality cut deeper than he expected. He stepped closer. "Please, can we talk?" Her fingers stilled on the keyboard. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she leaned back, folding her arms. About what? Your little experiment. Or how you tricked me into believing you were someone else. He winced. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. Her voice cracked on the words, though her eyes flashed with fire. You let me pour my heart out to a stranger, when that stranger was the same man who made my life miserable by day. Do you have any idea how violated that feels? I do now, he whispered. And I hate myself for it. Something in his tone stopped her. It wasn't the commanding voice of her boss. It was raw, stripped down, almost desperate. I wore that disguise to see people as they really are, he continued. Most treated me like I was invisible. You didn't. You spoke to me. You laughed with me. You trusted me. And somewhere along the way, Sophie, I stopped pretending. I wasn't acting anymore. Her throat tightened. His words should have melted her, but the ache of betrayal still burned too deeply. She pushed back her chair and stood. You don't get to say that. You don't get to tell me you care after lying to me every single night. She grabbed her bag, but as she walked past, he caught her wrist gently, not with authority but with a quiet plea. Then tell me what I can do, he said, voice low, eyes searching hers. Tell me how to fix this. 'Cause the truth is, I'm in love with you, Sophie. And I don't know how to stop. Her breath hitched. The words she never wanted to hear, yet always secretly longed for, hung between them. Her lips trembled, but she pulled away. It's too late. And with that she left. The week that followed was a torment for them both. Sophie tried to convince herself she could go back to normal, but her heart betrayed her. She missed the warmth of their midnight conversations, the way he made her laugh, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. But then the anger returned. How could she love a man who tricked her? Ethan, meanwhile, became a ghost of himself. He cancelled meetings, ignored calls, and sat in his office staring at the door, waiting for her to walk in. The empire he had built seemed meaningless without her trust. Finally, he made a choice. If he couldn't convince her with words, he would show her with actions. Friday evening, Sophie left the office late once again. As she stepped outside, she froze. There, parked at the curb, was a black car. And leaning against it was Ethan, no disguise this time. Just himself, stripped of armor, vulnerability etched in every line of his face. Her heart hammered. What are you doing here? I need 5 minutes, he said. If you still want me out of your life after that, I'll walk away. No questions asked. She hesitated. Against her better judgment, she nodded. He opened the car door, gesturing for her to get in. Reluctantly, she did. The car drove them through the city until they arrived at a small, dimly lit restaurant. Not the kind of lavish place she'd expect from him, but intimate, warm, almost cozy. She frowned. Why here? Because this is where I used to come when I had nothing, he admitted. When I was just a kid trying to figure out how to survive. I wanted you to see me, Sophie. Not the boss, not the disguise. Just me. He guided her inside. The owner, an older woman, greeted Ethan like family, hugging him tightly. Sophie blinked in surprise. This wasn't the cold billionaire she thought she knew. This was a man with roots, with history, with scars. Over dinner, Ethan opened up in a way he never had before. He told her about his childhood, about how he'd clawed his way up from nothing, about how loneliness had become his closest companion even at the top. And when he finally looked at her, his eyes shone with something raw. You made me feel like a man again. Not a title, not a paycheck. Just a man who could laugh, who could hope, who could love. Tears stung Sophie's eyes despite her resistance. Ethan, she whispered. He reached across the table, taking her hand gently. I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But if there's even a chance, I'll wait as long as it takes. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her. She searched his eyes, looking for the coldness she had once despised, but all she found was vulnerability. Her defenses cracked. The drive back was quiet, but not strained. Something between them had shifted. Pain still lingered, but so did possibility. When the car pulled up to her apartment, Sophie hesitated. Then she turned to him. "Why me?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Because you're the only one who ever looked past the mask." Her chest tightened. She should have walked away. She should have slammed the door on him forever. But instead she whispered, "Do you want to come up?" Ethan's breath caught. "Are you sure?" She nodded. Inside her apartment, the air was thick with unspoken words. Sophie slipped off her heels, heart racing. Ethan stood awkwardly in the doorway, like a man afraid he might break something fragile. Finally she turned to him. "I hate what you did. I hate that you lied. But I can't deny what I feel. And that terrifies me." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek tenderly. "It terrifies me too. But maybe the scariest things are the ones worth fighting for." Her lips parted, trembling under the weight of everything unsaid. And then, slowly, he leaned in. The kiss was hesitant at first, as though asking for permission. But when she responded, when she melted against him, all the walls crumbled. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession, a surrender, a promise. For the first time, Sophie felt the truth in his touch. He wasn't pretending anymore. In the weeks that followed, their relationship wasn't perfect. There were moments of doubt, arguments sparked by the shadow of the lie. But Ethan proved himself in small, consistent ways. Listening, showing up, letting her see the man beneath the armor. And Sophie, in turn, learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to believe in the possibility of love stronger than betrayal. One evening, back in the office where it all began, Sophie found herself alone with Ethan once more. He grinned playfully, holding up a mop. "Remember this?" She laughed despite herself. "Don't remind me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "No disguises this time. Just me. Just you." Her heart softened. "Then maybe we can start over." His eyes lit up, and before she could say another word, he pulled her into his arms. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside that office, time stood still. Two people, two broken halves, finding wholeness in each other. Not through perfection, but through truth. And so, Sophie and Ethan's story closes. Not with perfection, but with a choice. A choice to lower their defenses, to forgive, and to begin again. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. There were moments Sophie questioned if she could ever truly look past Ethan's deception. And Ethan wrestled with guilt, determined to prove through action that his love was real. But in the end, love isn't measured by flawless beginnings. It's revealed in persistence, vulnerability, and the willingness to fight for someone when giving up would be easier. Sophie realized that Ethan, beneath the mask of power and pretense, was simply a man who craved to be seen, to be loved for who he truly was. And Ethan discovered that Sophie's strength wasn't just in her fire and wit, but in her capacity to forgive, to trust again, and to believe in something fragile yet powerful. Love reborn from brokenness. For all the walls they built, love found a way through the cracks. And perhaps that's what makes their story unforgettable. Not that it was perfect, but that it was real. And now, dear listener, I want to turn this moment to you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone betrayed your trust, yet your heart still whispered their name? Could you forgive if it meant finding a love that changes everything? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. If Sophie and Ethan's journey touched you, if their laughter, heartbreak, and redemption stirred something inside your heart, then I invite you to stay connected with us. Like this video if you believe in second chances. Share it with someone who knows the beauty and the risk of loving deeply. And most importantly, subscribe to Made of Love, where we bring you more stories that spark your heart, stories that remind you that no matter the scars, no matter the past, love always finds a way. Because, in the end, isn't that what we're all searching for? That one person who sees through the masks, forgives the flaws, and chooses us anyway. True love isn't about flawless beginnings. It's about forgiveness, vulnerability, and the courage to start again.